Paul, the MMA Shark, and as I said, very active MMA weekend. I hope you checked out my Bellator preview video. I snuck in a couple free plays in there, so maybe you win a couple units on Bellator and my free plays and hop in for UFC. Nonetheless, the MMA Shark, 13 cards to cover in the month of February. Head over to www.themmashark.com. Until tomorrow night, Saturday night at 8 o'clock, you can get half off your first month subscription. After that, the deal's gone. We have a huge announcement coming up over the weekend, groundbreaking announcement, taking us to where we already are, and that is the top. So head over to the website, sign up, get all my plays, text it to you, and be part of the plus 528 units we are up since last January. I say it in every video. If you're getting your plays on a Monday from a handicapper, on a Tuesday from a handicapper, or someone on YouTube tossing out free plays on a Monday, they're doing you an injustice. So much happens during the week. There's so much that you need to be ahead of before you make your plays. You trust someone like me with it, long-term profits await. So we have UFC Vegas 68 tomorrow night. And I say night because it is night. I'm on the East Coast. Prelims start at 10 p.m. Eastern. Main card starts at 1 a.m. Eastern. So it's going to be a long night of MMA. Bellator starting at 5 o'clock. UFC starting at 10. I don't know. I guess we got fights going until 4 in the morning tomorrow night. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to say this is an okay card. I'm not going to go ahead and say this is the card of the month. You need to be awake for this. There are spots on the main card I love. There's spots on the prelims that I hate. And hopefully, the Bellator main card overlaps this a little bit because the beginning of UFC Vegas 68 is kind of weak tomorrow night. We start off with Tatsuro Taira versus Jesus Aguilar. This fight was added last minute to the card, and it's opening the card, which is kind of strange. And the odds, Tatsuro Taira is minus 1650 right now. Like he almost already won the fight. Jesus Aguilar plus 1,000. You see somebody plus 1,000 in the UFC, and you think they're awful. That's not the case with Jesus Aguilar. He's 8-1. He won 8 fights in a row, and all but 2 were by submission. So he's not an awful fighter. Obviously, Tatsuro Taira, 23 years old, out of Japan, came into the UFC with a decision win over Carlos Candelario, and then a very impressive recent win over CJ Vergara. That happened in October. It was a second-round armbar in a fight that he completely dominated. From a handicapper's point of view, I got nothing there. There's one area that I may have scooped out a little prop that I'm going to send, but, what kind of handicapper is going to say, minus 1650, let's lay 16 units on Tatsuro Taira to get the win, and, that goes down, you're done, so no risk, no reward. Moving right along, this will be a very brief rundown. And I'll tell you why in the next fight or two. Fight 2 of the night, we have Jung Park taking on Dennis Tiuliulin. I like Dennis Tiuliulin. The odds right now, Dennis Tiuliulin is plus 190, and I'm not saying I like him to win this fight. I do like him as a fighter. He is coming in out of Russia. He is 1-1 in the UFC. Most recently, he fought Jamie Pickett back in September of 2022, and he did what Bo Nickel will undoubtedly do to Jamie Pickett, and that is finish him. It was actually a really strong knee that Dennis landed and knocked out Jamie Pickett. He's a tough fighter. He's 34 years old, so he's not exactly the youngest fighter. His adversary in this fight, Jung Park, who is 31 years old, fighting out of Korean Top Team. He's been in the UFC for quite some time. Very impressive win in his last fight over Joseph Holmes. Joseph Holmes was coming into that fight very hot. Some big knockouts coming into that fight. And Jung Park was able to defeat him by a submission. It was a rear naked choke in the second round. Prior to that, he fought Eric Anders last May of 2022. And he won that fight by split decision. I still remember the fight. He did not win that fight. Anders, I'm not a big Eric Anders guy. I had Kyle Dawkins as a pick at UFC Orlando to beat Eric Anders, and really I thought it would happen with ease. But Eric Anders, tough middleweight. He's not a bad fighter, but Jung Park was on a robbery there, a robbery that went in his favor. I did not think he did enough to impress me in that fight. The previous fight, he got knocked out by RoboCop, Gregory Rodriguez, and he had a majority decision win over Tavon Njoukwi and a decision win over John Phillips. So, he's not going out there and just flatlining people. I think Dennis Tiuliulin is very much in this fight. Do I think he's going to win it? I'm not sure yet. I'll get that text out tomorrow. But, minus 225 on Jung Young Park certainly scares me, as Dennis Tiuliulin is, he's in the fight. He's absolutely in the fight. Next fight, we've got a real barn burner that the UFC is tossing at us. It's in the women's 125-pound division. We have Ji Yeon Kim, fresh off 5 straight losses in the UFC, and she is favored right now in this fight minus 280. So coming off 5 straight losses, minus 280. Granted, some of these were split decisions. It could have went either way. Her most previous one over Jocelyn Edwards, I remember it opened up the Pena versus Nunez 2 pay-per-view card, and it was a really good fight. Jocelyn Edwards was coming forward with some heavy strikes, and it was a fight that Ji Yeon Kim did enough to survive in, but not get the decision. Previously to that, she lost a decision to Priscilla Casuelia. She did fight Molly McCann back in January of last year and lost a decision there. She lost a decision to the new title challenger, Alexa Grasso. So, she's coming in with close fights, fights that she could have almost won, fights she's not getting hurt in, but she's not winning fights. 0-5 in the UFC, and you're still there. She also had a loss to Antonia Shevchenko earlier in her UFC career. So the fact that she's there, does the UFC see something in her? I'm really not sure. Her opponent coming in at plus 235 is Mandy Bone. Mandy Bone 7-2 as a professional. Her 2 losses are in the UFC. She's 0-2 in the UFC. You've got to think this is a loser leaves town fight. She lost a decision to Victoria Leonardo. She also lost a decision to Ariane Lipski. That's not a bad loss to Ariane Lipski, who is a very aggressive striker. I feel like both women have survived in all of their fights. It's likely going to be a decision fight, whichever way this ends. If you're looking for a free play on it, I would look somewhere at the over 2.5, or yes, fight goes the distance. Not saying I'm releasing that as a play, but I do believe this fight goes the distance. And who wins this fight, I don't care that much. 0-5, your last 5 in the UFC, 0-2 in the UFC. It's just nothing there. There's better places we can put our money. So I said this video would be a little bit shorter because there are 4 fights on here that I will be handicapping, but I'm not going to be covering. I figure if I'm not giving a completely accurate assessment on the fight, I'm going to pass on it, and that is the 4 Road to the UFC fights. I did not handicap the Road to the UFC. There were not lines to it. I watched most of them. I followed them. I took notes during them. I took some mental notes during them. There's some strong plays in the Road to the UFC. There's also some sharp lines on them. So, you think at travel time and, weigh-ins and everything today, a lot of the variables to take into consideration. I will say that Zai at 22-3, he's an underdog in this fight versus Jiang Li, who is 9-1. At 145, I think that's going to be a pure war. I'm very excited to watch that fight. So by not giving a recap on the Road to the UFC fights, that takes us to the 1 a.m. main card tomorrow night, 1 a.m. Eastern. That will be brought to you by coffee, a lot of coffee, a ton of coffee, a gallon of coffee, a jug of coffee. I love the main card, though. Like I said, there's low points to this card and there's high points to this card. So opening up the main card will be a fight at 170 pounds between 6-1 Yusaki Kinoshita versus 8-3 Adam Fugitt. And the lines on this right now, Adam Fugitt is plus 285. Kinoshita is minus 345. Lines, in my opinion, are justified. Adam Fugitt is a tough fighter. He's out of Art of War and Fitness. He is coming off a knockout loss to Michael Morales. Prior to that, he had a very impressive win in the LFA that paved his way to the UFC, and that was by knocking out King Solomon Renfro. That was a winner goes to the UFC fight, and Fugitt was able to put out Solomon Renfro. Prior to that, 3 finishes over Devin Brock, Reno Magimio, and Jonathan Visate on more of a regional level. So he doesn't have a ton of experience outside the UFC. He was fighting a pretty good fight versus Michael Morales before getting succumbed by punches in the 3rd round. He definitely won the 2nd round. 1st round was back and forth. He did show he has a chin, but Michael Morales ultimately did swarm him with punches and bunches to finish him. So Yusaku Kinoshita coming in at 6-1. He is training out of Japan. Mainly this card is focused on Japan, China, Israeli fighters. This will be his UFC debut. He does have one controversial loss on his resume, and that happened on Rizin. He actually grabbed the cage and got disqualified. That is his only pro loss. One thing that I can say with Kinoshita, he fought the best competition to get to the UFC. As a 1-0, he fought a 6-0. As a 3-0, he fought a 22-3. As a 3-0, he fought a 17-19, probably not the best competition. As a 4-1 after the grabbing the fence, he took on a 22-11. And then again, the huge knockout win on Dana White's Contender Series in the 3rd round over Jose Enrique Souza, who was coming into that fight with a very good resume. So Fugitt looking for his first UFC win, and Kinoshita looking for his UFC debut to be a win. I think it's going to be a very exciting fight. I think it's going to be a fast-paced fight. I had to check Topology just to see how surprising it would be. I figured 30% would be for Fugitt and 70% would be for Kinoshita. Tapology, a lot of these guys on Tapology really need to subscribe to the MMA Shark. I say to my VIPs all the time, let's be 1%ers, because so many plays, you see 99% on one and 1% on the other, and, we're the 1%er. This fight in particular, 12% are on Fugitt and 88% are on Kinoshita. I think that from a gambling perspective, it's parlay, dog, or pass, and maybe we'll have some props to back that up, but if you're out there laying minus 345 on Yasuku Kinoshita, it's a little crazy to me. I mean, it might be 2 in the morning when they fight, but that's a little wild. And by the way, who the hell is betting Tatsuro Taira at minus 1650? I just keep watching that line climb. It was minus 600 earlier this week. I had a feeling it would climb, but are people really putting down $1,650 on Tatsuro Taira versus an 8-1 coming in 8-fight winning streak to win $100? Man, there's better ways you can make money in MMA, I promise. Even if Taira wins the fight, you've made the dumbest bet ever. Don't bet on Tatsuro Taira. It is way too expensive. Win or lose, it's way too expensive. But, if you take that bet and you lose, just a moron. Next fight on the main card. This fight is one of the fights that I put a diamond max unit playout on earlier this week. In fact, I was so excited to get this playout on Monday. And by the way, it's a total that I put out. As I was saying earlier, to put a straight playout on a Monday, you damn well better get that right, because there's so many variables that change during the week. This particular play that I put out, you can't get anywhere near this price right now. But let's talk about the fight. We have Choi versus Kyle Nelson. Kyle Nelson, the Canadian, at 13-5. He's coming off a unanimous decision loss. A unanimous decision loss to Jai Herbert in a fight that he just really fought scared. It was stepping back, punching and ducking. He did have good head movement in the fight, but he just looked like he was afraid to get knocked out, and that probably was the case considering he was knocked out by Billy Quarantillo the previous fight. He did have a knockout win over Polo Reyes in the UFC, was submitted by Matt Sales and knocked out by Diego Ferreira. So 4 losses in the UFC, 3 of them by finish. You look at Choi, he's been around for a while. He had a lengthy layoff. He's coming off back-to-back knockout losses against more competition, though. One being Charles Jourdain. He was knocked out in the 2nd round. And also the last person Jeremy Stevens knocked out back in 2018 was Choi. So, both of these guys are susceptible to being finished. I think it's going to be a war. I personally think this fight's going to be an all-out war, a brawl. Looking at the lines right now, Choi is a minus 190. There is some money coming in on Kyle Nelson at plus 160. And I can see why there's money coming in on Kyle Nelson. He's the more active fighter. He's been the more active fighter. Jai Herbert didn't finish him. Choi has got bricks in his hands, so if he catches you clean, forget it. So I think that's going to be a good fight. I think that fight is, when I look at my clock and it's 2 in the morning, I'm watching that fight. I'm feeling great. It probably wakes me up. Then comes Marcin Tybura versus Blagi Ivanov. This has snoozer written all over it. In fact, over 2.5 rounds is minus 315 in a heavyweight fight. If you have ever seen that before, please comment below, because I can never see a heavyweight fight. I can never remember a heavyweight fight that was minus 400 to go the distance. And it's not like neither of these guys are finishers. I just don't... I see it being a really boring fight. The lines have been flip-flopping all week. Tybura was plus 120 at one point. Now he's minus 140. There's a lot of money coming in on Tybura right now. Tybura, 23-7, has fought very elite competition. His stock's very high right now. Last year, August 20th, UFC 278, he was plus 800 taking on Alexander Romanov. Got crushed in the first round. Romanov gassed, and Tybura survived and won rounds 2 and 3, and ultimately defeated Alexander Romanov, who was 16-0 at the time. Prior to that, he lost the decision to Alexander Volkov. He did knock out Walt the Big Ticket Harris and Greg Hardy in back-to-back fights in 2021. A decision fight with Ben Rothwell. So he fought Sergey Spivac. He defeated him by decision back in 2020. So that was the signature win. Blagi Ivanov is a huge heavyweight. Fighting out of AKA, he's got a lot of tough training partners. Coming into this fight with a decision win over Marcos Rogerio de Lima. It was a total snoozer. The fight before that, taking on Augusto Sakai, he lost a split decision. One of the worst UFC heavyweight fights I've ever seen. He's not a killer-be-killed fighter. He tries to win rounds. He tries to bank rounds. Let's remember, he lost a split decision fight to Derek Lewis. So, I know Derek Lewis can be a little bit low volume, but, to go 3 rounds with Derek Lewis and lose a split decision means you've practically done nothing. I think Marcin Tybura at minus 240 makes sense. I wouldn't think he should be more of a favorite than that. But, guys, I'm just warning you. You're going to be tired on the East Coast watching the Tybura and Ivanov fight. And I think this fight's going to make you a little bit more tired. I don't see either guy hurting each other. 37 years old, Tybura, 36 years old, Ivanov. I don't know. Maybe that's when you go refill your coffee, because there are 2 great fights coming up on the main card in the co-main event and main event. So co-main event, we have Da Un Jung taking on Devin Clark. Devin Clark, the underdog in this fight, at plus 210. Da Un Jung is minus 250. One thing I like about Devin Clark is he's tough as hell. And his dad corners him. His dad in his corner is an absolute riot. Devin Clark can get starched in a round and have it 10-8 round, and his dad's in the corner going, "You got this, you're looking great, let's go, let's finish him." And, Devin Clark loses a lot of rounds. Even when he was fighting William Knight, he lost 3 out of his last 4. He was fighting William Knight. He was down 0-2 on the cards and knocked out William Knight in the 3rd round. So it's one of those scenarios where, he can be pretty tough to put away. He was submitted by Anthony Smith, triangle choke in round 1. By far his toughest test was Anthony Smith. He took on Ion Cutelaba and lost the decision to Cutelaba. That's kind of scary. Typically, Ion Cutelaba puts you away in the first round, which he was not able to. And if you get Cutelaba out of the first round, you're going to knock him out. He was not able to do anything versus Cutelaba. And then his last fight, he took on Azamat. And obviously, 11-0 Azamat. Murkanadov is a stud. He's a pure killer. He's 11-0. He knocked him out in round 3. So I will say Devin Clark gives full effort out there. He's a tough out, even though he has been finished before. But he's got a tough test in Da Un Jung, fighting out of Korean Top Team. He is 16-3 as a professional. He did get knocked out by Dustin Jacoby last time out, and we called that. I had Dustin Jacoby by knockout in that fight. It was plus 400. I had Dustin Jacoby to win that fight outright. Jacoby was plus 100 of an underdog, if you want to call it an underdog. But prior to that fight, Da Un Jung has looked phenomenal in the UFC. Big knockout win over Kennedy Njokuwi. A nice win over William Knight. He did fight Sam Alvey to a draw. It was a really good fight. I think he did enough to win the fight, but you think Sam Alvey was one of the worst ever, but he really wasn't. He just ended his career on an awful low note. He's been around a while. He's been in the UFC since 2019. His only time he's been finished was to Justin Jacoby. I think it's a barn burner of a main event. You got a guy that's going for the kill, that's got a very good wrestling game in Jung versus a very freestyle fighter in Devin Clark, who is very tough to put away. Should be a good fight. Should wake us up a little bit before the main event. By this time, it's probably about 3:45 a.m. East Coast, and making the walk is none other than Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivac. Sergey Spivac and Derek Lewis, as you all know, likely know, were scheduled to fight back in November of 2022. Derek Lewis tested positive for COVID just hours before he was supposed to make the walk. And he didn't just test positive for COVID, he really had COVID. I mean, vomiting, lost a lot of weight, was able to keep the weight off healthy. I know the internet is full of pictures of the skinny legs. I promise those are not real. Derek Lewis said he had the best training camp of his life. And he's also saying he tried for this fight. So I think he said he tried versus Tuivasa too, though. So we'll have to see what happens there. Sergey Spivac he's very good. He's not a top 3 heavyweight in my mind. He's a good heavyweight. If he gets you to the ground, he's very heavy on you. One thing about Derek Lewis is he's shown the ability to get up. He has quit in him at times, unfortunately. I almost feel like his last fight versus Sergey Pavlich, who I believe is way better than Sergey Spivac, that, he kind of quit, but it was also kind of an early stoppage. But, Derek Lewis can sometimes be so slow to react that the ref thought he was done when really there was some more fight left in him there. Obviously, he took the loss to Tai Tuivasa in a round where in round 1 he had Tuivasa on the ropes and pretty much finished. And in round 2, he took that shot and just face planted forward, and that was it. Prior to that, December of 2021 was his last knockout win when he flatlined Chris Daukaus. The UFC has not been great to the Daukaus brothers as of late. Kyle has just been cut after multiple defeats in a row. Chris coming off 2 knockout losses in a row, both being in the first round. But Derek Lewis, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Maybe not athletically, but that one-punch power. Look at in the apex what he's done. Fighting in Las Vegas, fighting in Houston, Texas, or Dallas, Texas, anywhere. If he's not fighting in Texas, he's in the fight. You look what he did to Curtis Blades in the apex. Blades shoots in, he hits him with an uppercut, drops him out. Blames Herb Dean for the extra shots he threw because Herb was on the other side of the octagon, and Blades ate 3 extra shots, which he was out for quite some time. But Sergey Spivac, the younger fighter here, 28 years old, Polar Bear team. He's a grinder. He's got very good striking. Coming off 2 knockout wins in a row, one over Augusto Sakai in the second round, and one over Greg Hardy, which I really enjoyed every second of it. Man, did he destroy Greg Hardy, and it was a beautiful thing. And if you're a Greg Hardy fan, I apologize. I just feel like you should be earned a contract to the UFC. You shouldn't be handed one, and that's what happened to him. Tom Aspinall did put out Sergey Spivac. Marcin Tybura defeated him by decision, and Walt Harris put out Sergey Spivac in 2019. But, Sergey, he's really emerging. Let me tell you, big win over Alexei Olenek, a nice win over the very hard-to-finish Jared Vanderina. Jared Vanderina may not have the best record, but he's very hard to put away, and Sergey put him away. I definitely can agree with him being a minus 225 favorite in this fight. I know a lot of fans love Derek Lewis. He's a fan favorite. I think it's going to be a very good fight. My mind is made up on it. I have already sent a play out on this fight. I may have more to add. I may not. If you do sign up for the MMA Shark between now and when the fights start, I always monitor my dashboard. New subscribers, I will get you caught up. Huge day of MMA tomorrow. Going 5 a.m. to probably 5 p.m. to probably 4 in the morning. I will be ready for it. We just finished up PFL tonight. I was 2-2 on the card. It wasn't a good night. It wasn't a bad night. Had the dog in the main event. Thought she was going to do a little bit more than Amanda Levy. Came down to the third round. It was almost, a 3-unit night. Instead, we settled for a 2-2 night. PFL Challenger Series isn't exactly the greatest thing, especially tonight. But I will say the fights did deliver tonight. So the real action is tomorrow, or if you're watching this today, we have Bellator 290 and UFC Vegas 68. That's my preview for it. www.themmashark.com. This will be on Spotify as well. If you don't want to watch it on YouTube, you can find me on Spotify. Subscribe. Always throwing free plays out there. And check me out on Facebook. After every fight is over, I post the recap of exactly what my play was. Win, lose, or draw, I'm posting. You know, we have winning nights, we have losing nights, but in the big picture, we crush it. So check it out at www.themmashark.com and check on that Facebook. A major announcement coming this weekend. So make sure you like that Facebook page. Until then, enjoy the fights and make it a good one.